The lair of the Wendigo. They say if you go down to the woods today, you're in for a big surprise. But this isn't the kind of surprise whispered about in children's songs. This one is older, colder, hungrier. If you go down to the woods today, you'd better go in disguise, because when the earth freezes over, when the branches glaze with ice, and when the snow swallows every sound, you may find yourself at the threshold of something ancient, something waiting, the lair of the Wendigo. Long before settlers crossed the harsh northern lands of North America, the Algonquin people spoke of a spirit, a shadowed and merciless force with the power to slip quietly into the minds of men and women. It did not scream or roar. It whispered. It fed not on bodies first, but on thoughts. As winter tightened its grip, this spirit stalked the weak, the starving, and even the wealthy who clung greedily to their comfort and stores. In their dreams, it planted dark seeds. Visions of human flesh, sweet as meat simmering over fire. The dreams were so vivid that when the victim awoke, the craving never loosened its claws, and if by weakness or desperation they consumed the flesh of another soul, there was no return. Their humanity melted away, and the cold sculpted something new in its place. They became Wendigo. This word, Wendigo, meant two things. It was the name of the spirit that possessed the living, and the name of the creature the victim became, a monster with an unending appetite that no feast could ever satisfy. The descriptions were chilling: tall, painfully thin, with skin stretched tight like parchment over bone. Its face held a warped remnant of the person it once was: sunken cheeks, endless black eyes, and lips wasted away until its needle-sharp teeth were bared in a permanent, furious grin. Its arms were long and skeletal, ending in claws that sliced easily through flesh and tendon. It moved quickly, far faster than anything that looked so broken should. It watched from between the trees, silent and patient, learning your shape, your scent, your voice. Some stories claim that it mimicked the voices of loved ones, calling softly from the dark, leading the unsuspecting into places where the trees watched and the snow hid many sins. For generations, this was a cautionary tale, a way to explain harsh winters, starvation, and the dangers of greed. But as time passed and towns grew where tribes once camped, the legend did not fade. Instead, it evolved. Now the Wendigo is whispered about as a cryptid, a creature not bound to myth alone. Sightings persist, and the question remains: do people summon the story to explain shadows in the snow, or does the story still walk the forests, breathing frost into the night? There are few famous accounts. Most whisperings remain unverified, drifting through forums and small-town gossip. Yet occasionally, something surfaces, a story so strange that even those who tell it do so cautiously. One such account came from New Brunswick, Canada, near the quiet region of Grand Lake, just outside a place called Jemseg. A man on Reddit shared his story in April of 2015. He and his wife had moved there the previous summer, onto 4 acres of land bordered edge to edge by thick old forest. They spent months fixing up the house, settling in just as winter descended, a winter colder and harsher than anyone in the region had seen in decades. Snow piled higher than fence posts, windows frosted over in minutes. The world became white and still, and in that frozen silence, something began to watch. Their nearest neighbors lived a mile or two farther down lonely Route 695, but in the dead of winter, it felt as if the couple were the only living souls for miles. The whiteout swallowed the world whole, muting every sound, softening every edge. Even so, they didn't mind. The quiet suited them. That winter, the sun slipped behind the trees just after 4 p.m. The deep purple twilight that followed felt almost unreal. It would spill across the snow-covered earth, painting everything in shadowy tones. With the world blanketed in silence, the evenings felt impossibly still, as if something was waiting just beyond sight. And then came January 24th. Around 1 a.m., the man was jolted awake by frantic scratching at the back door. One of the dogs was barking, low, tense, desperate. Thinking she simply needed to go outside, he slid quietly from beneath the blankets, leaving his wife asleep upstairs, and headed down the stairs toward the kitchen. He barely had the door open before the dog barreled into the night, charging straight for the tree line. Her barking cut through the frozen air, quick, sharp, angry. He called after her, once, twice, but she didn't stop. She didn't even look back. With a rush of worry, he shoved on a pair of snow boots, grabbed a flashlight, and hurried out into the yard. The storm had buried nearly everything, leaving only the faint suggestion of paths and shapes beneath the uneven snow. The beam of his flashlight trembled against the trees. He could hear her, the snapping of branches, the rustling of brush somewhere farther in. The dog was still growling, still barking, but at something he couldn't see. And then silence. A thick, suffocating quiet settled over the woods. He stepped to the tree line, standing at the threshold where the safety of the yard gave way to the forest's darkness. Slowly, he moved between the trees, ears straining for any hint of his dog. Nothing, he called her name again, but only his own breath answered. He walked deeper, 10 feet, 15, 20. The world felt still, frozen in time. The only sound was snow crunching beneath his boots. Ahead, pale trunks came into view, a small cluster of European white birches ghostly against the dark. That was when he heard it. Babe, his wife's voice, soft, close. He spun around, expecting to see her at the edge of the trees, but no one was there. The woods were empty. Then the voice came again, babe. Only now it sounded farther away, deeper within the forest. A creeping dread crawled up his spine. He swept his flashlight back and forth through the branches. When the beam shifted left, something moved. At first, he thought it was a cluster of broken limbs rising from the snow until those limbs stood. A towering, thin shape slowly uncurled from the darkness, long, spindly limbs unfolding like a spider stretching awake. When the flashlight caught its face, there was no gleam, no reflection, only two deep, black voids where eyes should have been. He didn't think, he ran. Snow sprayed behind him as he sprinted, heart pounding in his throat. The trees seemed to pull at him, reaching for him as he raced toward the open yard. He burst from the forest, stumbling across the snow, barely staying upright. He didn't look back. Only when he reached the back door did he stop, and there, waiting, sat his dog, calm, silent, staring at him as though she'd never left. Shaken, he rushed inside. His wife was still asleep in bed, exactly where he'd left her. Later, he would write, I don't know if what I saw was a Wendigo, but it looked like the legends. Maybe it was a ghost, or an alien, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But I know what I heard, my wife's voice in the trees. And I know what I saw, those eyes. I haven't gone back into those woods since. Months passed, and winter began to loosen its grip. But the quiet of the countryside had lost its comfort. It felt like something still lingered among the trees, watching. Later that same year, a young man named John Crowder would learn just how powerful that silence could be. As part of a trail-cutting crew working in Brasher State Forest, St. Lawrence, New York, he spent his days carving pathways through thick woodland in preparation for a public opening the following year. He, too, would come to believe something unnatural lived among those trees. Unlike many of the workers on the project, John wasn't local. Most of his coworkers returned to their homes every weekend, leaving him alone in a small cabin at the newly built trailhead. It wasn't luxurious, just a box of wood tucked deep into Brash Estate Forest in St. Lawrence, New York. When winter arrived, isolation became a silent companion he couldn't quite shake. By mid-December, heavy snow began to blanket the region. The woods became still, the trees bending beneath the weight of ice, and every path his crew had cut felt swallowed by white. It was during one of these winter weekends, the weekend of December 12th, that John experienced something he would never forget. He recalled sitting near the fire inside the cabin. Snow had been falling steadily, and he'd added another log to the flames, then climbed back into his bunk with a book. The night felt normal, quiet. Then something hit the roof. A single impact, dull, heavy. He froze for a second. His first instinct was the simplest, probably snow dropping from an overburdened branch. He brushed it aside and returned to reading. Several minutes passed. Then another disturbance, soft, light, barely noticeable. It sounded like something was scratching or dragging across the roof. John tried to reason again. Maybe branches, maybe a raccoon searching for warmth or food out of desperation. The sound eventually faded, and the forest settled back into silence. After another hour, sleep pulled him toward rest. His eyes had barely closed when another sudden impact struck overhead, then another, and another, each following the next with deliberate spacing, like footsteps crossing the roofline. Then nothing, silence but not peace. John felt his body tense, his heartbeat quickened. Those noises, they weren't small or light. They were slow, weighted, certainly not a small animal. It sounded as if someone had walked the length of the cabin roof. He sat upright, suddenly aware of how far he was from anyone. Deep woods, harsh weather, no roads nearby. No reason anyone should be out there, yet he was sure someone or something was. After some hesitation, he forced himself toward the window. He leaned close, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. The snow was falling gently, soft enough to mute every sound. Instinct told him to stay inside. Curiosity told him to look. He was already dressed for the cold, so he slipped into his boots. With careful steps, he opened the cabin door and stepped out onto the balcony. The night met him with a crushing stillness. No wind, no animal sounds, only falling snow settling silently on every surface. John stood there, letting his eyes adjust. The roof above was empty, but something felt wrong. His attention kept pulling toward a stand of tall trees nearby. High branches swayed under the weight of ice and shadow. Though he saw nothing, a sensation clung to him. Something was watching. He raised a hand toward his flashlight, but an instinct deeper than fear made him stop. Something in his mind, quiet but undeniable, warned him that turning on that light would be a terrible mistake. He couldn't explain it, but the feeling was overwhelming. He believed, absolutely, that if he illuminated those trees, he would not live to see daylight. His rational mind tried to fight the thought, but instinct won. He backed toward the door, never turning his back on the forest. Once inside, he locked the door and pulled the curtains closed. The cabin felt too small, too thin. Seconds dragged into minutes, minutes into hours. Nothing more happened, but sleep would not come. Only when exhaustion finally overcame fear did he drift into an uneasy rest. When morning arrived, pale sunlight crept through the curtains. The night seemed distant, almost unreal. Yet when John approached the window, one look at the balcony froze him in place. In the untouched snow lay footprints, bare, human-shaped, leading up to the cabin door and standing right where he had stood hours before. Something had been there while he slept, something that walked barefoot in the snow, unaffected by the cold. When his coworkers returned on Monday, John recounted the entire night. Most laughed, assuming he just scared himself. But not everyone dismissed it. One or two men fell silent, their expressions severe. They told him quietly, almost reluctantly, that it sounded like a Wendigo had visited him. The final story comes from another witness. Charles Chuck Latimer. Chuck Latimer was a seasoned hunter from Delta County, Michigan. Born in 1939, he spent decades roaming the woods and dense forests of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Over the years, he came to know the land intimately, its trails, its silence, and the strange stories whispered around campfires. He had heard countless tales about the mysteries of the North American wilderness. Some spoke of strange creatures, others recalled eerie sounds echoing through the trees. Chuck himself had heard a few unusual noises during earlier camping trips, but he never witnessed anything truly out of the ordinary. As a practical man, he dismissed such stories. His relatives described him as honest, straightforward, and level-headed, someone who never exaggerated and approached every task with a no-nonsense attitude. The story of his encounter was not told until years later, after his death. It was submitted to the public by his son, Andrew. The event took place in December of 1983, while Chuck was on a solo hunting trip deep within the Gwyn State Forest. He was 3 days into the trip when something happened that shook him so deeply he would avoid lone hunts for many years afterward. It was early afternoon, and the terrain had been unforgiving. Snow covered everything, and Chuck had spent hours tracking a large buck across the freezing landscape. The trail led him through rugged ground until he finally reached the edge of a wide clearing. There, he spotted the buck. The animal was unaware of his presence, and being downwind, Chuck had time to settle into a good shooting position. Steadying his Remington rifle, he took aim and fired. The buck jerked, then bolted into the trees beyond. Chuck realized his shot had landed farther back than intended, off by about 3 inches, and struck only the flank. Still, a wound like that would likely slow the animal down. If he followed the blood trail, he thought, he would eventually find it. He began crossing the clearing. That was when the atmosphere around him suddenly changed. The air felt heavy, thick, almost muted. The forest, moments earlier alive with faint winter sounds, fell completely silent. Chuck later described feeling exposed, as though unseen eyes were studying him from every direction. Despite the unease creeping through his body, he pressed forward. Just inside the tree line on the other side of the clearing, he saw the buck collapsed on its side. Its body rose and fell sharply, its breath visible as white clouds in the icy stillness. Chuck approached cautiously, gripping his hunting knife. When he was within about 30 feet, he noticed something odd behind the deer. At first, it looked like a pile of snow, just an indistinct white mass, but then he saw it shift. It was moving. He stepped forward slowly. Suddenly, an inhuman face lifted up behind the wounded buck. Its mouth was smeared with blood, and it stared directly at him with an expression so horrifying, Chuck would later say it was the most evil sight he had ever witnessed. The creature lowered its body protectively over the deer, as if guarding it. Its posture was predatory, defensive, warning. A sharp, piercing cry tore through the clearing. It was enough to snap Chuck from his frozen terror, and he bolted. He tore across the clearing, heart pounding, not daring to look back. He made it to his camp, grabbed his things, and left. According to his son, Chuck never returned to those woods. When he later described the creature, he said it was impossibly thin, and even though it crouched low, he could tell it was very tall. Its skin was pale, almost the same color as the snow surrounding it. Chuck told this story many times to those he trusted, insisting every detail was true. Even as cancer took hold of his body years later, lying in his final days, he shared the tale again, one last time. What really happened that afternoon remained a mystery known only to him, and whatever he had seen watching over that dying buck. When it comes to Wendigo encounters, the greatest obstacle is this. The creature's existence is rooted in legend, not confirmed reality. In its earliest form within Native American folklore, the Wendigo was never described as having a physical body. It was believed to exist purely as a spiritual presence, an embodiment of hunger and corruption. Only much later did stories begin portraying it as a physical being. Even then, its appearance changed dramatically depending on who was telling the tale. Many tribes described it similarly to how it is commonly imagined today, tall, gaunt, and monstrous. Others insisted it looked more like a savage, man-eating Sasquatch. In modern interpretations, especially those spread online, it has taken on a more dramatic and far more terrifying appearance. A humanoid figure with the skull of a deer for a head and long branching antlers rising from its crown. Unlike the Skinwalker, another well-known Native American legend, the Wendigo is not capable of shape-shifting. These major inconsistencies only deepen the mystery and cast further doubt on whether the creature was ever meant to exist in a physical form at all. Before the rise of modern medicine, many illnesses, especially those affecting the mind, were believed to be caused by malevolent spirits. Understanding this context makes it easier to see how the idea of the Wendigo may have grown. Northern US and Canadian winters are brutally harsh. The cold alone can kill, and food can disappear entirely for months at a time. In such desperate conditions, survival sometimes pushed individuals into unthinkable acts. There are stories of people being forced to eat the flesh of the dead to stay alive, something considered the most unforgivable taboo. Some believe the Wendigo legend was created to explain these situations, as well as to prevent them, a reminder of what happens to those who betray humanity for hunger or greed. It also served to reinforce a moral code, discouraging the hoarding of food or wealth, and encouraging the community to share its resources so that no one would be driven to monstrous behavior. But even with all this said, a lingering question remains. Is it possible that people may be encountering something very real in the forests and simply giving it the wrong name? North America is home to vast, untouched wilderness. There are remote regions where few, if any, humans have ever walked. The idea that something unknown might be living deep within those forests, something ancient, human or not, becomes easier to entertain. In recent years, a number of videos have emerged online that claim to have captured glimpses of such beings. Whether these clips are cleverly fabricated or sincere recordings is impossible to determine with certainty, but some are undeniably fascinating. One such video surfaced in 2009. It shows a small group gathered around a campfire. While they talk casually, their camera captures something moving just beyond the circle of light. A pale, humanoid figure traveling on all fours, keeping to the shadows as it circles the campsite. Their conversation continues normally, unaware of what is lurking just beyond reach. What raises suspicion, however, is the strange way the camera is already pointed toward the darkness rather than toward the group. There also seems to be a light source illuminating the creature as it passes by, something unusual for a spontaneous encounter like this. Whether staged or not, the moment is unsettling. Another recording, dated January 1st, 2014, shows a group of young men exploring an abandoned structure. As they make their way through the decaying building, they hear something moving beyond the walls. Unable to ignore the disturbance, they follow the noise. When they turn a corner, they come face to face with something that sends them fleeing in panic. One of them asks, confused, "Is that a dress?" Another answers, "I don't know," followed by a disgusted whisper. Whatever they saw is never clearly captured on camera, but their reaction feels raw and immediate, leaving behind more questions than answers. One of the videos often discussed shows a group exploring an abandoned house. At first, nothing seems unusual. They move from room to room, talking in low voices and trying to remain calm. "Was that you?" someone asks. "I don't hear anything," another replies. They try to convince themselves it's nothing and continue forward, but after stepping into what appears to be the backyard, they stop again. "There's nothing," one of them hesitates. "Do you want to go back?" Moments later, one whispers that they saw something, maybe an animal, but they can't be sure. Their voices grow more nervous. "It sounds like it's on the other side," one says. Another answers, "Where we came in." "Yeah, back there." Without warning, panic sets in. "Turn that off, turn the light off." Something seems to be moving in the darkness, and they try desperately not to draw attention to themselves. "What is that?" one asks. "It's in the corner." Then chaos erupts. "What is that? Which way is the exit? Which way is the exit?" The footage ends abruptly, never revealing anything clearly. The recording is extremely dark, and nothing about the creature is distinguishable. Because of this, and the overly convenient reactions, it feels staged, especially by modern standards. Another clip supposedly tied to the legend was recorded in 2005 and uploaded years later in 2011. The camera operator had been filming in a remote graveyard surrounded by dense woods. Only when reviewing the footage 6 years later did he notice something strange. In the distance, just behind a gravestone, a thin humanoid shape appears to peek out and then quickly retreat. Some viewers claim the figure resembles an extraterrestrial being. Others insist it resembles a Wendigo. The years-long delay before uploading is intriguing, but the figure could easily be nothing more than a simple prop, a mannequin pushed briefly into view before being pulled away as the camera pans. The final video is perhaps the most dramatic. It was found on an old phone from the mid-2000s, and no one has ever come forward as the owner. In the footage, a couple walks through a forest, recording casually as they talk. Suddenly the camera shifts. One of them points ahead. "Do you see that? Over there, look, look, look." They notice something moving between the trees. "What is that? I saw it again right there." Their uneasiness escalates. "I don't like this," one says repeatedly. A moment later, the camera swings wildly. There, look. They finally glimpse a figure standing in the woods, pale, twisted, and distinctly humanoid. That's not an animal. Fear overwhelms them. Go, go, Geo. The video ends suddenly as the phone drops to the ground, leaving only muffled audio. If the recording is a hoax, it is undeniably well executed. Still, there are subtle details that cast doubt. The creature's vocalizations never change in volume, even as its distance from the camera shifts, an unusual trait for any genuine on-location audio. The visual quality is also poor, making it difficult to confirm anything. In the end, the Wendigo seems to remain firmly in the realm of legend, a creature preserved in Native American stories and modern internet horror tales. Its name even lives on in medical terminology, Wendigo psychosis, a condition in which sufferers experience a fear of or a craving for the consumption of human flesh. For most, that is where reality ends. Yet the question persists. Did the Algonquin people craft this tale purely as symbolism, caution, and morality, or were they describing something they had truly witnessed? And if so, could that presence still exist, hidden somewhere deep within the frozen wilderness?